Welcome, everyone. And as you're all getting settled, know that we will have this recording up within 24 hours-ish on our YouTube channel. We're really excited to have such a great group and people still coming in. Especially welcome to all of you if this is your first connections call. We hope it's not your last, and we're very happy to have so many different types of groups joining us today. And Bill, I see that you got your tea, right? Excellent. Okay, keep chewing. It's all right. You're not up yet. Welcome, everyone. I am grateful too that we're able to record. We have that technology. I know there are a lot of people in my area that don't have power tonight. Speaking of power, so I'm grateful that this will be a resource to use in the future as well. Obviously, your book is that as well.
Well, maybe we should get started.
Yes.
Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Barbara Rossing. I'm a member of the board of Lutherans Restoring Creation and also a member of the Eco-Faith Action team of our Northwest Intermountain Synod, which is co-sponsoring this. And that's Eastern Washington, Idaho, and a couple congregations in Oregon, Eastern Oregon, and Jackson Hole, Wyoming. So we welcome you. It's a Zoom, but we hope you'll all keep yourselves muted. And if you have questions, we'll take those after Bill gives a lecture. Just put a Q in front of your question. We'll know it's a question. So the run of show tonight is Bishop Shelley Bryan Wee from the Northwest Washington Synod will lead us in prayer. And then I'll introduce, and then Phoebe Mored will go right into a land acknowledgement. She's the CEO of Lutherans Restoring Creation. Then I'll briefly introduce Bill McKibben, and then he'll lecture to us. So welcome, everybody. Bishop Shelley, do you want to take over?
Hello, everyone. It's so good to see all of you. One of the tricks that I found, and I don't know if you want to do this or not, but one of the tricks I found on Zoom that helps me, this is not my prayer, but I'm just giving you a little thing, is there's a new thing, or it's been around for a couple months, but there's a new thing on view in the upper right if you're on a computer, and there's gallery and there's speaker and then there's multi-speaker. And if you click multi-speaker, you can still see people, but you can also see the people, and it helps me stay alert to the person talking, and then I can see the person rather than wondering where they are on this, especially when there's so many. Okay, that's my little advertisement for the multi-speaker. And now I'll do what I've been asked to do, which is to pray. Let us pray. O Creator, you who created all that exists, and you who calls this earth good. O Jesus, the Messiah, you who are as close to us as our own breath and as grand as the galaxies. O Spirit, you who moved over the waters and you who continues to move through this world and our lives. May we enter into, and may we work with you and with all towards your vision of this world, a world of flourishing creation, where the sun and wind are used for the good of all, where communities thrive in harmony with all that is around them. Guide us in justice and courage as we live out our calling to protect the vulnerable and to steward resources equitably. May we resist the forces that degrade your creation, and may we not be tempted toward quick fixes. May our policies, our habits, and our choices reflect you and your preferred future. Above all, may our imaginations be sparked anew as we look to the sun as the star that fuels our world, and to the Son who renews this world. May we be rooted in the hope that you are drawing us and your whole creation toward fulfillment. In your name we pray. Amen.
So now I'm going to share what we call more of a knowledge acknowledgement, and I will share the screen so you can read along. As we live, work, and worship in the land that is now called the United States, Lutherans Restoring Creation recognizes that we do so on land that was stolen from Indigenous peoples. As we are called to restore creation, we are also called to restore right relationship with one another. So we join in this holy vocation of loving our neighbor. We honor all our Indigenous siblings who have been companions of the lands, waters, and beings of Turtle Island since time immemorial. We charge our community to learn about the original and continuous stewards of the land upon which we exist. We lament legacies of violence, cultural genocide, and displacement of Indigenous communities, committing ourselves to hearing and speaking the truth of that history and its ongoing effects. May we gather faithfully in mind, body, and spirit so that we may mend what has been broken and embody Christ's gospel of abundant life.
Thank you, Phoebe and Lutherans Restoring Creation. So I'll just say the minute I saw Bill McKibben's new book, Here Comes the Sun, I knew we should have him talk to us. Our Evangelical Lutheran Church in America names this as a Kairos moment for the climate. And Kairos was a word that Jesus used to both signal what a crisis we're in and also this opportune moment of possibility. And Bill McKibben's new book does that beautifully. He's written a lot of books. One of my favorite is this one, The Comforting Whirlwind, where he talks about the biblical book of Job. I've got a lot of other books, but it's what's so amazing about this new book is it's so positive that we really do have a second chance for addressing the climate crisis with the incredible economy that has made solar panels, wind turbines, and battery storage the cheapest way there is to produce electricity now. So he'll talk about that. His book also talks about we need to safeguard indigenous lands, respect tribal sovereignty, and get away from extraction, care for the most vulnerable. All of this is in this book, and it was written with amazing speed. The final chapter ends on a deeply spiritual note, the role of religions in solving this crisis. And I'll just say Bill is a Methodist Sunday school teacher. That's all in the book. He's a writer, an organizer. He founded 350.org and Third Act. He writes for the New Yorker magazine and Sojourners magazine and a weekly newsletter on Substack called The Crucial Years. I think he can help us Lutherans embrace this moment for justice and for transformation, for healing God's creation. So Bill, welcome.
Well, Barbara, thank you so much. And thank you for your amazing work over the years, which has been illuminating to me in so many ways. And I'm really grateful for it. And I'm grateful to y'all for letting the Methodist join your fellowship for the evening. Look, I'm one of the reasons I was so happy that Barbara asked me was that I've been so moved by watching the Lutheran Church in action in Minnesota these last months. And I hope that you'll pass on to your colleagues in Minnesota how much that witness has meant. I'm afraid that they've set a high bar for all the rest of us, and we're going to have to figure out how to be equally courageous when the jackboots show up in our neck of the woods too. I was at a protest the other night, and people were chanting, "We're not cold, we're not afraid. Minnesota taught us to be brave." And I think that no question that the kind of Lutheran spirit of the Upper Midwest played no small part in the extraordinary courage on display in the Twin Cities. And actually, that's sort of a useful place to begin. I will be positive and hopeful, but let me say we are at a very dark moment, and we're at a dark moment for two reasons. One is that the climate crisis is now playing out with extraordinary power and speed around the world. I wrote the first book about all this back in the 1980s, a book called The End of Nature. And the things that we were warning about then are the headlines of today. The epic run of fire and flood and storm that we now see uh, everywhere and all the time, and that are getting deeper and worse with each passing quarter. The last 3 years have been the three hottest years that we've ever recorded. We learned last week that we're on the brink, it appears, of an El Nino that will begin in sometime between July and September. When it comes, it will push us back into new record-breaking territory for the hottest years on this planet. 2027 seems almost a lock to be the hottest year we'll have ever witnessed, and with it will come a new surge in this chaos, which now is reaching beyond individual scary events and doing deep damage to the most fundamental structures of the planet. The jet stream, which draws its power from the temperature differential between the poles and the equator, is now increasingly stuck in weird high amplitude stalled positions that produce these long periods of drought or flood on either side. The Gulf Stream and the other big currents of the Atlantic, the greatest heat distribution engine on Earth, are starting to flicker and falter as fresh water pours off a melting Greenland, changing the salinity and hence the density of water in the North Atlantic and eroding the power of those giant conveyor belts of water. We're doing deep systemic damage, and we have very, very little time to even head off the worst of it. And obviously, at the moment, the other problem that we face is a rising tide of authoritarianism around the world, most obviously in our own country. I'm happy to be giving you an excuse to not have to watch the State of the Union tonight, because I fear it will be another grim display of what our country has come to. A state that, frankly, I find very hard sometimes to even um, comprehend, because it's unlike anything in my experience of the world. The idea that the President of the United States is publishing pictures of Black people as apes is beyond the pale and beyond anything that we've ever even imagined. And our job is resistance, and we'll talk more about that. The good news, the one big good thing happening on the planet, is big enough and good enough that it gives us some chance of taking a bite out of both the climate and the authoritarianism crisis. And that is this rapid, rapid, rapid surge of clean energy around the world. The stuff that we've called alternative energy our whole lives is alternative no more. About 5 years ago, we crossed some invisible line where energy from the sun became the cheapest power on Earth. And when I say energy from the sun, I mean solar energy that we catch on panels, and I mean wind energy, because the sun heats the Earth differentially, producing the wind that blows, that turns those majestic turbines. Um, um, that, as I say, became cheaper than a cheaper way to produce power than burning coal or gas or oil at about the beginning of this decade. And that has set off an extraordinary surge of development around the world, the fastest energy transition we've ever seen. We don't see it quite as much here because it's headquartered elsewhere, China most of all. China's produced about half the clean energy in the world over the last 36 months or so. The pace at which they're doing it is astonishing. This time last year, spring last year, the Chinese were putting up 3 gigawatts of solar panels a day. A gigawatt's the rough equivalent of a large coal-fired power plant. So they were putting up one of those out of solar panels about every 8 hours across China. We've never seen anything like it. And there are plenty of places in this country and elsewhere where we can see some of the same things starting to happen, if not quite on the same scale. California has led for a variety of reasons, as it often does. And California has now reached the point where most days it produces more than 100% of its electricity for long periods of the day from renewable energy. At night, when the sun goes down, the biggest source of supply to the grid in California are batteries that have been soaking up excess sunshine all afternoon. California is using 40% less natural gas to produce electricity than they were 2 years ago. That's a very big change in what is the fourth largest economy in the world. And California has now been surpassed in the installation and deployment of clean energy by the Lone Star State of Texas, which is ironic for obvious reasons. It's the world headquarters of the hydrocarbon industry. But the economics of sun and wind and batteries are so remarkable that it's been very hard for the fossil fuel industry to thwart its rise in Texas. Around the rest of the world, in some ways, the stories are even more beautiful because they come from some of the poorest places on Earth. Pakistan's probably been hit harder by climate change than any country in the world. Its urban temperatures routinely reach 125 degrees now in the summer. 2010 and 2023 saw what were probably the two biggest floods on our planet since Noah. Um, um, Tens of millions of people displaced from their homes. Pakistan's one geographic advantage, however, is a border with China, across which have flowed extraordinary numbers of solar panels over the last 18 months. Pakistanis, tired of unreliable and expensive electricity, have been buying them up, going on YouTube and TikTok to figure out how to put them together, and covering the homes, warehouses, factories of Lahore and Islamabad and Karachi. You can observe it on Google Earth if you want. They put up, individual Pakistanis, not a government program, put up in 18 months the equivalent of half the country's national electric grid in solar panels. Pakistani farmers were early adopters. Those of you who've traveled in rural Asia know that the soundtrack of that part of the world is the hum of diesel generators pumping up water from the deep tube wells that are the legacy of the Green Revolution of the 60s. That diesel is often the biggest cost for peasant farmers. They were early adopters, therefore, of solar panels. They often lack the money to build the metal supports that we're used to seeing. They've just been laying them on the ground and pointing them at the sky, but they're using about 35% less diesel in Pakistan this year than they were 2 years ago. So a big change. Now, in the last 6 months, it's Africa that really has started to see this boom. Solar installations were up more than 50% over the last 12 months in Africa. Any place where Chinese trade routes are well established is seeing this flood of panels. And it's particularly poignant there because there are still 600 million people in Africa who have no electricity. And we're never going to get it from the grid. Coal might as well never have been discovered as far as most of Africa was concerned, because in 250 years it did nothing. But now community after community are coming online and fast. From community microgrids, small scale solar spreading across the place. It's beautiful and powerful to see. In fact, all of this story is, I think, extremely beautiful, not only because it's the first real tool we've had in the fight on climate change. It's not enough to stop global warming. That won't happen. We've waited too long. But it's not too late to start shaving tenths of a degree of how hot the planet gets. And every tenth of a degree that we raise the temperature of the Earth moves roughly 100 million people from a safe climate zone into a more perilous one. So those are our brothers and sisters. That is the biggest task that humans currently have. But it's not the only benefit of this transition. one death in 5 on this planet, about 9 million people a year, die from breathing the combustion byproducts of fossil fuel, mostly those particulates that lodge in the lungs and do their damage. There are 5 million school children in New Delhi. 2.5 million have irreversible lung damage from breathing the air. This is now unnecessary, and we can see how fast that air can clean. 10 years ago, the cities of China all topped the list of the dirtiest, most polluted cities on the planet. But no longer. They're now, for the most part, pretty, their air is as clean as American cities. And partly that has a lot to do with the change in how they're generating power, but it also has to do with the fact that 50% of the cars sold in China now come with a plug in the back. Friends of mine in Beijing and Shanghai, I haven't been there in a couple of years, but they say not only is the air much, much cleaner, but the cities are far, far quieter because most of the cars now are electric. And across the rest of the world, it's e-bikes and motorized rickshaws, three-wheelers that are helping clean urban air every place. The third reason that it would be nice to make this transition fast is, I think, and this goes to these questions around authoritarianism, because as long as we depend on fossil fuel, which is only available in a few places, the people who control those places end up with way too much money and power, which they then abuse. So Vladimir Putin, Europe's biggest oil and gas baron, who used his winnings to launch a land war in Europe in the 21st century. The king of Saudi Arabia, who, cuts up the people that he doesn't like. The Koch brothers, our biggest oil and gas barons, control more refining capacity and pipeline capacity than anyone else, used their cash flow to systematically erode our democracy over the last generation. If you wonder why it was so easy for Trump to kick it over, it's because its foundations had been rotted out over the last 30 years. It would be really nice to imagine people everywhere able to provide their own power from the sun and the wind that the good Lord has blessed every corner of this earth with. We all have more than enough of this stuff. At the northern latitudes where the sun weakens in the winter, that's the period when the winds strengthen, and wind power and sun power are perfect complements in the higher latitudes. Solar power works better. It works well everywhere, but it works best towards the equator. This actually offers some hope of starting to rebalance the grievous gulf between north and south on our planet. Think about how the geopolitics of this planet would have differed over the last 100 years if oil had been of relatively trivial value in that period. How many wars and assassination attempts and coups and terrorist plots and things we would have avoided. In fact, you don't have to think very hard because our government provided a case in point a few weeks ago when we decided that we would take over the country of Venezuela. And to his credit, President Trump made no effort to pretend that this was about democracy or human rights or anything else. He just said, you have oil, we want the oil, here we come. It would be very nice and is now entirely possible to move past that world. So this is a huge win, this transition, for everybody on planet Earth, except the people who own oil wells and coal mines, for whom it is a deep threat to their business model. A deep threat because at the moment, those reserves of coal and gas and oil are worth, it depends on the daily value of oil, but worth 30 or 40 trillion dollars. And that's why they've been willing to spend big sums of money to game our political system. You'll recall that candidate Trump told oil executives as he was running for office that if they donated $1 billion to his campaign, he would do anything that they wanted. They ended up donating about $500 million, donating advertising, lobbying expenses in the last election cycle. That was enough because alone among nations now, the US is busily trying to shut down clean energy in an effort to prop up fossil fuel. I think that probably the Trump administration has gone beyond even what big oil imagined. We have The federal government has shut down wind farms that were 90% complete, already generating power off the New England coast. They've put all federal land off limits to solar panels. They've even now started trying to, well, they have closed down some of the satellites that monitor how much carbon there is in the atmosphere. They're trying to pull the plug on what is the most important scientific instrument on Earth, the monitor on the side of Mauna Loa in Hawaii, that for 65 years has given us the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. Um, you know, my 2-year-old grandson has already reached the point where he understands that covering his eyes doesn't actually make him invisible. But our administration seems to think that if you simply stop looking at what's going on, maybe no one will notice. Which means that we need to figure out how to resist that world. And I will give you just a couple of ways that we're working on. Obviously, much change waits on changing the cast of characters in Washington. And I hope that everybody is taking seriously the fact that the midterm elections this year, if we don't manage to do them right, may well be the last set of elections that we ever get to have. So that's what my year is being spent on mostly. But even before we change Washington, God willing, we have lots of work that we can do at the state and local level. For example, it costs about 3 times as much to put solar panels on your roof in the United States as it does in Australia or the EU. A little bit of that is tariffs on solar panels, but not much. Solar panels themselves are so cheap now. In Europe, people are using them to build fences instead of wood because they're cheaper than, pressure treated lumber. The real difference here is that we spend huge amounts of time and hence money on unnecessary, overregulated bureaucracy and inspections and things. There are 15,000 jurisdictions in this country. Each has their own set of rules. They want drawings back and forth, send teams of inspectors up on your roof, on and on and on. That's not how it works anyplace else in the rest of the world, where putting solar panels is roughly as difficult as buying a new refrigerator. You call somebody up, Monday morning, by Wednesday, they're up pounding things into your roof. By Friday, you're connected and producing power. What happens when you have a whole society doing that? Well, you can look at a country like Australia, which almost 40% of people now have solar panels on the roof. They're producing so much electricity from the sun that beginning in June, every Australian, no matter whether they have solar panels or not, will get 3 free hours of electricity every afternoon between 12 and 3. People will obviously be scheduling their dishwashers and their washing machines to run then. They'll be charging their EVs then. They're busily buying increasingly cheap storage batteries so they can fill them with free power at the noontime and use it to run their homes all night. Human beings have worked hard for 700,000 years to provide energy, whether it was hours a day gathering firewood or all the work to pay a power bill. That's not really necessary anymore. We really are, if we want to, approaching a place where that power is almost too cheap to be bothered metering. That's what's happening in Australia. Think about what that would mean for poor people in this country. Even more remarkable and beautiful, if maybe less important in the general scheme of things, are what the Europeans have taken to calling balcony solar for people, apartment dwellers mostly. 4 or 5 million people across Europe have gone out to whatever you call Best Buy in Germany and come home with a few €100 poorer with a solar panel designed to be hung from the railing of an apartment balcony. And on the back is a normal plug that you just plug into the wall. No electrician needed. Often produces 20%, 25% of the power that an apartment uses. So it's not solving the problem, but it's a good start. It's also illegal everywhere in this country, except that progressive bastion, the state of Utah, which last March passed by unanimous vote of the legislature the enabling legislation on the perfectly logical grounds that if it's good enough for the people of Stuttgart, it's good enough for the people of Salt Lake City. And now you can go on YouTube and watch lots of videos of happy Utahns plugging in their solar panels, and generating power. We have 22 states now. We did this big event called Sunday in September, about 500 events around the country to celebrate solar power at the equinox. And one of the things we did was launch a big campaign around this kind of balcony solar. We have 22 state legislatures considering this change this year, and I think we'll get a bunch of them before the year is out because this costs nobody any money. All it takes is just this change in regulation that allow people to go to work in their own homes. When I say we, I'm talking mostly about my work is mostly done these days through this thing that we're calling Third Act. And just in case there are any of you on this call who have passed your 60th birthday, you're eligible to join us at Third Act. We now have about 120,000 after 3 years, older Americans who have come together to fight for climate and for democracy. Those are the two things we feel are under threat most and the things that we're organized around. And so one of our tasks this year is very much to fight for these changes to local and state law to allow this solar revolution to come to America as it's coming to the rest of the world. We're also busily fighting around the elections because if we don't have a functioning democracy, then the chances of standing up to these concentrations of wealth and power in the oil industry and elsewhere are small. It's worth remembering, if you're worried about oligarchs and billionaires, that the model for all of this, the first guy to figure out how to do this was John D. Rockefeller, who understood that the control of oil gave him the chance to be the richest man in the world. And his legacy, I'm afraid, is all too evident. So we're fighting on many fronts. But we're not fighting mostly or entirely a negative fight. We're convinced that I'm convinced that this is one of these times when, when the thing we need to do coincides very dramatically with what we're programmed to do at the deepest and most beautiful level. We don't really know how prehistoric people thought about things because being prehistoric, they failed to write them down. But we do know that every pile of rocks that they produced, from Stonehenge on to thousands more around the world, all pointed to the equinox or the solstice. These guys were fascinated by the sun. We know that the minute that human cultures started inventing myths of any kind, the very first job that they had to explain was, how does this thing rise over here in the morning, set over here in the evening, and get back over here the next morning? So the world is full of gorgeous stories about giant ostriches swallowing the sun and vomiting it up in the morning, and on and on and on. Um, and we know that across every kind of religious tradition, there's an understanding of of the power of the most charismatic object in our corner of the universe. Uh, Francis of Assisi's magnificent canticle to Brother Sun is one of the most beautiful pieces of devotional writing that we have. And it's from the beginning of that prayer, that that poem, that prayer, that Pope Francis took the phrase Laudato Si, that was the title of his encyclical on climate change. Maybe the most remarkable piece of writing yet this millennium, a thoroughgoing critique of modernity that had its focus around the ecological crisis. Francis's successor, Pope Leo, summoned a bunch of us to Rome in September for a conference to mark the 10th anniversary of Laudato Si. It was a great pleasure to be there, in part just to observe the new pope, who is a weirdly normal American guy. If he showed up at your Thanksgiving, you would just assume he was your bachelor uncle that had wandered in. Um, he made it very clear that he was going to keep doing all the things that Pope Francis had done around climate and energy. In fact, he announced that later this year they will flip the switch on a big solar farm outside Rome, and Vatican City will become the first fully solar powered nation on planet Earth, which is a wonderful thing. When I got up to speak, I said, "This is great news, and it provides us with what should be our mantra going forward, energy from heaven, not from hell." And I think if we take that as our watchword, we're capable of helping produce some real change. But it's going to take coordinated effort from lots of people to make that happen. And faith communities have a big role to play in that at local and state levels, but also embracing this change as part of their mission and making it clear that we have to do this work everywhere in the interest of, stewarding creation, which is the first thing we're told to do in the Old Testament, and in the work of loving our neighbors, which is the main thing we're told to do in the Gospels. This is the single best chance that we have to do that in our world right now, to oversee, to speed up, to spread out across the planet this remarkable, remarkable transformation. So I'm very grateful to you all for taking up these issues and thinking about them, and very, very happy just to get to join you for a little while tonight. If you do have questions or comments or critique or abuse or whatever you would like, I'm happy to entertain it, but mostly just thanks for being a part of this whole big effort.
Wow, thank you, Bill. Wonderful. I'm just looking at some of the questions, and I'm really glad to hear you quote the Gospels and the Hebrew Bible. So I'll kind of group some of them together. One of them asks, who are the most effective messengers for reaching people who are concerned about the move to solar and wind? Because as you mentioned, there's a lot of opposition. And then I mentioned about my sister in Indiana is encountering that with the solar project. So who are the best messengers? How do we do that? And then I guess maybe related to that would be the question of indigenous communities when they don't want these projects on their land. And I know you addressed that in the book. So if you could talk a little bit about
Well,
that.
In my experience, indigenous communities are easy to very much want a lot of this renewable energy development, and they're mad, as they should be, at the fact that the money that had been set aside under the Biden administration for precisely this purpose, a lot of indigenous development of renewable energy resources, has been yanked away by the Republican Congress. And that's important to restore that money. On the question of opposition to solar, let's say, often it manifests in opposition to solar farms around the country. Um, I think it depends on where you are, who the best messengers are, but the message is often fairly easy to get across. In my experience, it's generally not farmers who are opposed to this. Farmers understand that this offers a real opportunity for diversifying their income and making it more reliable. It's people who live nearby, often people who've retired to rural areas and who don't want to look at solar panels, um, which is not okay at this point. There are a lot of ways to start talking about this. We don't need to take most of the landscape of America for solar panels. We think we need about 2% of the land surface of America and most other countries for sun and wind. And that does not seem too much to devote to the crop of energy, of electrons, which is an important crop. At the moment, the biggest crop in America is corn. We grow 60 million acres of it. 30 million acres of that corn we grow for ethanol, gasoline. So half the corn acreage in America. That 30 million acres produces 3% of America's energy. If you took that same 30 million acres and covered it with solar panels, you'd produce not 3%, but about 100% of the energy that America uses. Now, we don't want to cover Indiana stem to stern in solar panels, and we don't need to. We've got lots of rooftops and parking lots and things to provide some of this, but we do need to use some of that land. And if we do, the payoff for everyone is enormous. I was in central Illinois as I was working on this book with a farmer who was converting a part of his corn land. This is the richest, farmland in the country, to solar farms. And he was saying, look, here's an acre that's still in corn that we use for ethanol. In the course of a year, it grows enough corn to produce enough ethanol to drive my Ford F-150 pickup about 25,000 miles. Next to it, this acre I've put in solar panels. It produces enough electrons in a year to drive my Ford F-150 Lightning, the EV version of exactly the same truck, not 25,000 miles, but about 700,000 miles. That gives you some sense of the efficiency of all of this. And he said, I don't have to pour any nitrogen and phosphorus on the solar panels to make them work. And he added, I have half the field left to work with, the rows in between the solar panels, which are now the blank space for an entirely new field of human endeavor that is traveling under the clunky title at the moment of agrovoltaics, but it basically means what we can grow or produce in those rows. And it turns out we can do a lot. On an overheating planet, shade turns out to be a fairly valuable commodity. So, for instance, European French vintners are finding that they can produce 60% more grapes from their vineyards when they're interlaced with solar panels. You've seen pictures of people grazing sheep and cows in these fields, which is a good idea if you're going to be grazing animals. Although the advice I've heard is don't put goats in your solar farm. They'll eat the cables and they like trying to jump up on the panels. So goats, not so good. In Vermont, where I live, what we've done with a lot of these fields is interplant the rows with pollinator-friendly weeds and flowers. Those have increased by about a factor of 100 the number of pollinating insects per acre compared with a cornfield. And that means that the surrounding orchards and row crops and things are much, much better pollinated. Fruit sets up 30 or 40%, and we're attracting all kinds of endangered pollinating insects and taking some chunk out of the biodiversity crisis at the same time. So I think this is a beautiful opportunity. Often, I think, on this question of who makes a good messenger, it's important to try and reach out across partisan lines here. Um, the polling indicates that even the most MAGA of Republicans still find strong support for solar energy. I've lived my whole life deep in rural America, sometimes in red state and sometimes in purple state places. That means that I have lots and lots of neighbors who have Trump flags at the mailbox and solar panels on the roof. And when I talk to them at fire company or at church or wherever, it's clear that they put up their solar panels for different reasons than me. Um, Less because of concern about the climate, more from the idea that my house is my castle, and it's a better castle if it has its own independent power supply, which again is not the reason I put mine up, but I'm a good enough American to feel that. I like the idea that I'm not as anywhere near as dependent on distant forces to keep things flowing. Um, um, so I think there are real possibilities. I mean, as I said, the one state in the union that has legalized this balcony solar stuff is the state of Utah. And the state that's putting up the most solar and wind power right now is the state of Texas. So this is not impossible.
Thank you. One of the questions is about divestment from fossil fuel companies. We do see you've got those posters on your wall
Mhm.
in the
Yeah.
background. I suspect a bunch of us are Costco credit card holders, and
Yes,
I love the way you took the Costco to task with the cake aisle. Would you tell that story, and then talk about a little about divestment? And I'll
sure,
just
of
say
course.
I'm so grateful. In 2019, when our ELCA voted not to invest in fossil fuel companies anymore, you were so wonderful about publicizing that. So thank you. But yeah.
Sure. Yes. So we've had this long-running divestment campaign that was modeled really on the campaign to divest from apartheid in South Africa in the 1980s, but has become the biggest anti-corporate campaign in history. We're at about $40 trillion in endowments that have divested in part or whole from fossil fuel, including the World Council of Churches, many, many denominations, um, on and on. Um, at the moment, one of the real adversaries here are the big banks, Bank of America, Citi, uh, Wells Fargo, um, that are the biggest funders of the fossil fuel industry. And these guys are amoral. They understand as well as anybody what's going on, but if there's money to be made, lending for the expansion of the fossil fuel industry, then they'll do it. And it's not okay. It's a huge, huge problem. It makes it much easier for the fossil fuel industry to carry on with all the stuff that they're doing. Um, One of the places where they're vulnerable is in their credit card business. Um, and so one of the places where we've been working hard and where those of you in the Pacific Northwest might be particularly effective is in talking with Costco, which is the Bank of America, their biggest single credit card customer. I think they have 70 million cards through Costco. And it would be very easy for Costco to just switch to somebody else on these grounds, and that would send a potent message. And the good news is Costco is a great company. We like them in so many ways. They treat their workforce well. and who doesn't want a free sample, now and again. Um, and so, yes, we've had a big campaign to try and persuade them, and it's at least reached the attention of the CEO and the board, and they've understood what we're saying. And I think we're beginning to make some progress there. And I hope that you all will keep it up. I know a bunch of you are in Washington State, where Costco is headquartered. My grandfather was the mayor and only doctor in what was then the small shipbuilding town of Kirkland 100 years ago. Um, and now is Kirkland, of course, is the headquarters of Costco and the name of their house brand. So I take very, very personally the whole Costco story. And I'm very hopeful that this will be one of the places that makes a strong stand here. It's a letter worth writing to their CEO, who's an interesting guy, Ron Vacris.
Thanks. There's so many questions. Wonderful here. One of them is, and I know you do treat this in the book, so maybe we could talk about this. If I take the ethic of Jesus seriously, I struggle to see how the U.S. can justify a lithium mine on the land of First Peoples, whether inside or outside of our borders, even if it's done in the name of storing solar power. So if you could talk about that whole issue of,
Sure.
the rare earths, lithium, all of that, and why we need any extraction.
Sure. So in the first place, I think it's fine to say that we don't that if indigenous people don't want to mine on their land, then that's okay. They have earned the right to having been the main sufferers of all the other industrial revolutions that there have been. It seems to me entirely okay for them to get to sit this one out, and especially since as we're very quickly discovering, a lot of these, we've got plenty of lithium all over the place. Uh, the price of lithium, even though we've been building batteries at an extraordinary rate, has been steadily falling because we're finding it everywhere, and we're finding that we don't actually even need to use it. The Chinese this year have building about half their batteries, not with lithium, but with sodium. Sodium is the fifth most common element in the Earth's crust. We're not going to run out of salt anytime soon. So it's important, and it is important to try and mine whatever we're mining responsibly. But it's also important to be clear-eyed about how things work. It's not as if not mining lithium means that we're not mining anything. At the moment, we mine unbelievable amounts of fossil fuel. And this is a very different process. If you go mine some lithium and put it in a battery, there it sits for 25 years doing its lithium thing. When the battery eventually degrades, you can just recycle the lithium out. And since it's valuable, we do recycle it out and start over again. If you go mine some coal, what do? You set it on fire, and then you have to go mine some more tomorrow. There's no recycling coal. It just turns into carbon dioxide and stores up in the atmosphere. That's why the Rocky Mountain Institute, Amory Lovin's shop in Colorado, in a study last year, said that the entire amount of mining needed for the renewable battery revolution by mid-century would be less than the amount of coal we mined last year on this planet. So if you care about mining and the damage it inevitably does to people in place, then don't pretend that you're not going to have any if you stop mining lithium. Figure out how to dramatically reduce the mining burden on this planet. And while you're at it, give a thought or two to the 9 million people a year dying from breathing the combustion byproducts of fossil fuel. They count too in any Christian ethic that you want to bring. I think too often there's uh, uh, a kind of lack of attempt to really analyze things that can go with uh, 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 that can go with our strong ethical sense. It needs to combine with some mathematical sense in order to be truly ethical.
Thanks. Can I keep asking questions? Okay, since it's Lent, somebody asked, shouldn't we be talking more about energy conservation in this transition? But I know you don't, you talk about now it's more important to go positively forward. So
Well, but I think it's a good idea to talk about energy conservation because I mean, that's a very useful thing to do. But it's worth understanding that it, to some degree, comes automatically as we move in the direction of electrifying things. So really what we're doing when we move from setting stuff on fire, coal, gas, oil, to using electricity from the sun and the wind is move from what a physicist would call heat energy to what they would call work energy. It's extraordinarily wasteful to burn, say, gasoline in your car. Only about 20% of the energy, 25%, actually goes to moving the car forward. Most of the rest is just waste heat. That's why you have that exhaust pipe on your car. Just making it run on electricity makes it endlessly more efficient. About 70% of the energy goes to moving the car forward, which means that even if the electricity was coming from a coal mine, it would be far better for the atmosphere to be running that EV. Same with heat pumps as opposed to furnaces and on and on. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk about conservation. Just be clear about the limits of doing that. I've been talking about using less my whole life. Some of you may be interested in finding in the library a book I wrote called Deep Economy. There you go. That was um, it was
deep
really
economy, yep.
a deep discussion of economic growth and GDP and what it means. I don't think that more makes us particularly happy in the ways that it's supposed to. I think that that's its weakness. And I think that means that 100 years from now, human beings will have figured out different ways to amuse ourselves. I think that we were built for contact with each other and contact with the natural world more than we were built for acquiring things. However, I do not think that that's going to change in a fundamental way in the next 5 or 10 years, which is the time that we have to try and slow down the crush of the climate crisis. 100 million human beings join what we call the consuming class now each year, most of them in Asia. And my guess is that they will follow at least partway down the path that we have trod in the West. And I think it's fruitless to pretend otherwise. I don't like pretend because we're in too difficult a situation to allow ourselves to say, oh, we don't need to build that solar farm, we'll just use less, or whatever it is we're going to say. We do need to use less, and we can, but I think it'll take time. In the meantime, we need to use the technology that our God-given intellects have produced to allow us to live more lightly on the earth, even as we continue to demand hot showers and cold beer and transit and on and on and on. Again, I don't mean to be stern, merely realistic. And the threat of climate change and the damage that it's doing enforces, I think, a certain kind of brute realism upon us.
Wow, thank you. So I'll just, in closing, ask you if you have a favorite Bible verse. But I love that you talked about St. Francis and Pope Francis. But I know in this book you talk about the book of Job, God's speech from the
Mm.
whirlwind. Anything else you want to say?
Job always remains my touchstone. Um, you know, Barbara, you're a biblical scholar, so you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that God's speech from the whirlwind uh, at the end of the book of Job is the longest soliloquy that God delivers in the Hebrew Bible or in the New Testament. Um, and it's definitely the most beautiful, this extraordinary account of creation. It's also a taunting, sarcastic speech where he just makes endless fun of Job for daring to question him and his the way he's ordered things, you know. And after 3 chapters of it, Job eventually just says, "Sorry, I asked. You know, can I sit down now?" Um, uh, Job, like all human beings, until very recently, was small and the natural world was large. That seems to me the main answer that God is supplying in the book of Job, that you are a small part of a beautiful, buzzing, cruel, mysterious, fascinating creation. In the last 100 years, we've made ourselves very, very large very quickly. It began, I think, with the invention of nuclear weapons, and it was Oppenheimer watching the first explosion at Alamogordo that quoted from the Gita, "We are become as gods, destroyers of worlds." We have so far, knock on wood, managed to avoid repeating what we did at Hiroshima and Nagasaki because we can envision the damage that one mushroom cloud can do. But we failed to really see that the explosion of a billion pistons in a billion cylinders every second of every hour of every day could do the same damage, that it could melt the Arctic. The heat equivalent of the energy that we trap with the carbon in the atmosphere every day is the heat equivalent of about 400,000 Hiroshima-sized explosions. That's why the sea ice in the Arctic is disappearing. It's why the oceans are rising. So Job had to, when God said, do you know where I keep the storm? Can you tell the proud waves where to break? Job was like, no, that's not me. That's you. Sorry I asked. We've been able to answer God right back. Say, no, we set how high the waves come now. We're responsible for how big the storms are. That's us. I think our job is to figure out how to make ourselves a little smaller in the next period. And I think that one of the great assists we have to do that is power from the sun and the wind, power from creation. And so I'm completely committed to trying to figure out how to make that happen, because I'd like to be able to, before I die, read Job with some of the same feeling that Job had when he was facing God.
Wow, thank you. And you say in here that it's comforting to Job to realize that the universe is so full of awe and beauty. So I love that. Well, thank you so much. I know I'd love to listen to you for another hour, but we got to stop. So I've asked Regina Banks to lead us in a closing prayer. She's the director of Lutheran Office of Public Policy in California and was a member of our ELCA delegation to the COP30 climate negotiations in Brazil. And then after that, we're going to play a beautiful meditation, if people can stay on Psalm 104 from Kristen Koshman, who's the board chair for Lutherans Restoring Creation. And I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us. And we hope you'll join March 17th when Jim Martin Schramm and I are going to describe the Synod resolution we have about the World Council of Churches Ecumenical Decade of Climate Justice Action, which we hope will really be a spiritual journey for our church and how Synod assemblies can adopt this. So Regina, over to you, and then it'll be over to this beautiful video. Thank you so much, Bill. This has really been wonderful. Thank you.
With gratitude for the offering we've just received, won't you pray with me? Gracious and life-giving God, Elohim, we thank you for this gathering, for the wisdom shared, the truth spoken, and the hope kindled among us. In a time when our climate and our democracy feel strained and uncertain, you remind us that possibility still shines. We give thanks for the gift of the sun, unhoardable, unrelenting, uncontainable, unquenchable, unfailing, unceasing, steady and generous like your love. Stir in us the courage to accelerate the work of justice and to resist the forces that cling to destruction. Help us to choose the path of life for this planet and its people. Teach us to read the signs of the times with clarity, not fear, El Shaddai. Give us wisdom to build systems that are humane and just, and humility to learn from communities already leading the way. God of wind and light, help us to look up each day to the star that fuels our world and remember that your creation is abundant. Make us people who organize, advocate, and act. Let our love of neighbor stretch across generations and borders. Strengthen our democracy through courage, truth-telling, and collective care. Yahweh Shalom, send us from this conversation not just informed, but transformed, ready to participate in the work of renewal you are already unfolding in the world. And your children here assembled who love you will say, Amen.
Amen.
Mm.
Mm.
Psalm 104. I am awestruck, Holy One, at this beautiful and boundless universe, cultivated over eons with love and care. Your creative intent envelops the world like a cloak. I see it shining in the heavens, hear it whispering in the winds, feel it crackling in the fire. For you energize the dust of the universe, the galaxies, the stars, the planets, right down to this jewel of an earth. You are wrapped in light as with a garment. You stretch out the heavens like a tent. You make the clouds your chariot. You ride on the waves of the wind. You make the winds your messengers. Fire and flame your ministers. You paint the earth with your Holy Spirit. Each stroke and color with purpose, place, and song. You put a restlessness in our hearts that leave us to seek you always. Therefore, I will sing your songs all my days and care for all you have created and keep my heart ever open to your love.
God bless. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.